Welcome to this session on how to achieve sustainable peace by dealing with the past to build a common future. I'm Hilde Haardeman. I work for the European Union, a project that managed to break through a vicious circle of centuries of war in Europe to bring peace, prosperity and freedom for hundreds of millions of citizens on the European continent. Developments in the world today show us that peace is precious and peace is fragile. And I'm honored to have today with us 4 distinguished panel members who each in their own way are working for sustainable peace. Ms. Ouidet Bouchamaoui, President of the Tunisian Confederation of Industry, 2015 Nobel Peace Prize laureate for her efforts that led to the peaceful transition to a new Tunisian constitution in 2014. Father, welcome. Welcome, Ouidet. Father Francisco de Roux, Jesuit, Chairman of the Commission for the Clarification of Truth, Coexistence and Non-Repetition in Colombia, one of the key institutions in the Colombian peace process. Welcome, Francisco. Ms. Hiba Casas, peace builder and change maker, head of the Secretariat of the Principles for Peace initiative of the International Commission on Inclusive Peace. Welcome, Hiba. And Professor Lebat, head of cabinet to the chairperson of the African Union Commission. Welcome, Professor. Now, in the next 45 minutes, we will look together at what are the factors that make peacemaking and reconciliation successful and sustainable. Our speakers will first share their experience, and then we will turn to you, our audience. Let's try to make the most of our limited time, and we will conduct this panel in English and in French. Alors maintenant, ma première question est pour
I'm going to ask a question, first of all, to Ms. Ouidet Bouchamaoui. Ouidet, you've played an essential role in processes to find a peaceful solution in Tunisia in 2015. What is essential in your view for reaching such a solution and ensuring that it continues? Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here with you. We've got excellent panelists with us today. Working towards peace is very difficult these days. We're in a very conflict-prone period. We're seeing wars everywhere. But there could perhaps be a little bit of hope if we can see some political will and also some will on the part of populations. We need to ensure that both young people and women are involved in this process. This is a real challenge in Tunisia. How can we ensure peace in this difficult period? How can we ensure that we have and maintain democracy in Tunisia? How can we also ensure a peaceful transition? At the time, we needed to ensure that we had people working together. We needed to ensure that everybody could sit down at the table and discuss. We considered that dialogue was really a key word. Everybody needed to listen to one another. We needed to take into account different opinions, accept that there were differences, and we needed to try to achieve consensus. Consensus was really key. So in Tunisia, civil society took the initiative and was able to set an example both to citizens and politicians. We demonstrated that it is possible to have peace if we have energy, if we have goodwill, and if we have a real desire to bring about change and to listen to one another. So we brought together political representatives, And we put in place a roadmap that had 5 key points, taking into account the needs of Tunisian citizens, both men and women. We acted as mediators, so to speak, and we laid down a path that could be trodden by all our citizens. We worked for many thousands of hours in a formal way, but we also, of course, worked a great deal in an informal context. We tried to achieve consensus, as I've said. We tried really to listen to one another. And thanks to this process, we did manage to have our politicians sign up to our roadmap. We actually then put in place a guide for discussion, a guide telling people how they needed to listen to one another's points of view. And this was very useful and very positive. We really focused on a democratic, consensus-based approach. After 6 months of discussions, we managed to put in place or decide on a date for elections in Tunisia, and then we managed to introduce a modern constitution. This was a successful process thanks to the involvement of civil society and thanks to the involvement of politicians. There was a real will to succeed, to bring about change in Arab countries. It was clear that everyone considered that democracy was a way for us to express our views, and we wanted it to be clear that Arab countries can be democratic countries thanks to the involvement of women, young people, and civil society as a whole. I would really like to pay tribute to the role played by Tunisian women in this process. Civil society, and particularly women, were at the forefront, young people too, in all these processes, and it's thanks to them that we were able to bring about change. In 1956, Tunisia gained its independence, and there too we saw a real will for change. We wanted to give women an equal role to that of men. And nowadays, fortunately, we have many women at the negotiation table. And I see that we have a majority of women here today on the panel, and that's wonderful. Excuse me, gentlemen, but I'd like to say that this is something very positive, because this is a very fragile but important topic. Peace. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Merci. Now I'm turning to Father Francisco de Rou. Francisco, based on your experience in the journey that Colombia has made over the past decades, can you share your insights on what it is that can allow a nation to achieve security and trust, and which lessons can one draw from the experience in Colombia for those who seek to achieve peace and reconciliation across the globe? Over to you.
Thank you, Hilde.
I am very happy to be here today, and it's also a great honor to be here with this group of panelists.
It's easier for me now, and okay, let's go to the point. Yes, I'm arriving here, and I have to talk to you from...
Can you speak a bit closer?
Okay. I would like to talk to you thinking and having present 10 million survivors and victims in Colombia. And I feel them present all the time when addressing you. I'm very happy to have here the Guardia Indígena of Colombia. Thank you for being here with us, because you have an immense recognition in Colombia. Without having weapons, the native people in Colombia have demonstrated that we can get peace and human rights without weapons, without guns. And this is an extraordinary the result of your fighting in Colombia for peace and human rights. The point in Colombia is that for about 60 years, we had gone from an internal armed conflict, absolutely irrational. There are not in Colombia a religious confrontation, there are not in Colombia a discussion about territories, but we go for a situation where 120 young people died in combat. Soldiers, police officers, paramilitaries, guerrillas. And for each person who died in combat, at least 5 civilians more died in massacres, in displacement, because of the mines, personal mines in the country. Now the solution for us has been obviously the peace process with the FARC people, the largest guerrilla force in Latin America and probably in the world after 60 years of fighting continuously. The basic point, or one of the most important results of this agreement was the rural reform because of the land situation in the country, and also what we call the system for justice, truth, and looking for the missing one, the disappeared people. And I was the one who had the responsibility of coordinating the Truth Commission. But I would like to insist in some basic points. Really, war is always an evil, always an evil, always. And war, what happened with the war is the war always goes against people who don't want the war. Civilian people who have to suffer the bombardments, the massacres, the displacement, the depression of the economy. The second point is that in order to have a solution, you have to listen to the victims from all sides, all the time. I mean, the indigenous women abused in the war, children who were recruited to the war, people who have been bombed and massacred, people who have been kidnapped. You have to listen to everybody. And this is victims before. Probably the central point in the Colombian solution was put the victims in the center, first of all. And we, for instance, we went to listen for about 30,000 victims in Colombia, everywhere, and also in different countries, in 24 different countries where we had about 1 million Colombian exiled because of the conflict. So this is absolutely central. The third point probably is to be in contact with the international community. The international community has been a great support for us, pressuring people, and especially industrialists, politicians, foreign presidents, to go into conversation with everybody. And this has been a great contribution for us. And for us, finally, transitional justice has been of a great importance. I mean, the possibility of inviting everybody to participate in the process, accepting a particular way of transform not only the victims, but also the transgressors, also the perpetrators in the process of recognition and transformation of everybody. And finally, the necessity of, through education, to create or to construct together an ethic based on human dignity. I will stress also something which I consider to be very important. When I refer to victims and to taking victims into consideration, we have to take into consideration nature, because we have destroyed the rivers in Colombia. We transformed the rivers into graveyards. We have to take care of the jungle, the forest. We really victimize the nature in Colombia. And also think about the future generation of people. We have the responsibility for the future generation, your children and your grandchildren.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Francisco. Thank you. Now, I would like to turn to Hiba Casas. Hiba, the world is changing. Making peace today, it's not the same as it was at the time of the Vienna Congress. Based on your experience in the Principles of Peace initiative, how may a new approach be needed for peacemaking, and what should be the key shifts in policy and practice to meet the challenges of the new era? Over to you, Hiba.
Thank you very much, Hilde, and it's really a wonderful opportunity to be with you all here and with the distinguished speakers. I think just 2 words about the urgency, because I think we've heard a message of hope and a message of also urgency and risk in what also Father Francesco said. But the reality as well is that we are in trouble. We have record number of conflicts, record high since World War II, 50 conflicts around the world. 2 billion people around the world are living in conflict context. And our track record as international community has been mixed at best. We've been more successful in bringing an immediate cessation to hostilities and negotiating ceasefires and short-term agreements, and we have been a lot less successful when it comes to preventing conflict and sustaining peace. And we see that in the fact that in many countries around the world where we get a peace agreement, they last around 7 years before we start to see signs of recurrence. And what we're seeing from this global consultations we've done through the Principles for Peace initiative, which is, by the way, a collective effort of 120 organizations, and an international commission on inclusive peace. But what we've seen from what we've looked at in the 61 countries we've consulted is that it's not only the geopolitical complexity, the reality of proxy and hybrid warfare, the reality of disinformation and polarization, which are all adding to the complexity of our operating environment, but it's also peace processes can fail on their own terms because they're not broadly legitimate, because they're not sufficiently inclusive, and because they're not transformative in many cases of some of the fundamental causes that led to the conflict in the first place. And at the heart of it is something you talked about, Father Francesco, is also the question of dignity. And in many of the countries where we've engaged, we've seen and heard a very strong point around the legitimacy deficit. And the legitimacy deficit of peace process is about who's involved at what level, but also what peace delivers. Because our toolbox is focused so much on political peace, so much on political transitions, so much on elite pacts, so much on political settlements, which are all important, but they're not enough, because for the average person, and I'm one of these, I grew up in a conflict country, I'm Palestinian, for the average person who sees the potential of a peace process, you think of the tangible benefits. You think about your dignity, about your education, about your economic opportunity. You think, am I going to have an accountable government in place, a responsible government in place that actually is concerned for the people? Or are we entrenching corruption with certain elite pacts and institutionalizing clientelism? And these concerns, we hear them even in countries where peace processes are holding, like Bosnia, like Guatemala, 2.5 decades after, where peace continues to hold. So there is an urgency. The good news, though, is that also there are places where we see peace to hold, like in Timor-Leste or looking even at the Bangsamoro process. So I don't want to be all doom and gloom in saying, you know, yes, we are in trouble, but I think there's potential to shift and recalibrate. So to answer your question, I think what we're learning from this global process is that potentially there are 4 areas where we potentially need to recalibrate. The first one is how we think and approach peacemaking. And it's not a question of polarity, but what I'm saying is mainly complementing our focus on political peace with a focus on social peace. Complementing our focus on political transition with accountable governance, with tangible benefits to communities. So that's the first shift. And the second shift is really around the relationships between the externals and internals. And you know, we always talk about the need for solidarity. That's important because we're so interconnected, we're so interdependent. We saw it with COVID-19, we see it with climate change, we see it with the war in Ukraine. Yet the international system is quite fragmented at a time when we need it most. So I think this notion of thinking about how we can move towards a partnership compact based on solidarity, based on humility, where also the externals see their role as midwives rather than architects of what happens in the country, and really co-creating locally led solutions and grounded solutions. And the third one is really around how we use the process of support to go beyond quick fixes to longer term solutions, and looking at how we can actually accompany the short term with laying the grounds for more focus on accountable governance, on responsibility to population, and shifting sometimes the coercive relationships that can be between states and societies in the aftermath of conflict. And finally, you know, every once in a while we get so hung up on certain concepts which are so important and fundamental, but they get used and abused. And I'm going to talk about the inclusion agenda, which at the risk of being a bit unpopular right now, but let's be provocative to trigger some discussion. I think it's very important that we're championing the Women, Peace and Security agenda and the Youth, Peace and Security agenda. But I have a fundamental problem, and not me only, what we hear globally. If we just feel so happy and satisfied by bringing women and youth to the table without giving them influence and ensuring that actually the outcomes of peace processes are actually inclusive outcomes and plural outcomes. So my call is also for pluralism and inclusion, and not to see inclusion only as representation, but seeing it as inclusive outcomes in institutions, in laws, in policy, and that requires carrying on. So in a way, that's what we're trying to articulate in what we will be launching later this year, what we call Principles for Peace, or a peacemaker's covenant that is addressed to governments, to civil society, to business actors, and to all who have an impact on peace, to try and really infuse their decision-making and process of reflection as they're engaging. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hiba. Please give her an applause. Alors maintenant, je vais tourner vers le professeur Lebat.
I'm now going to turn to Professor Lebat. Based on your experience in the Commission of the African Union, can you tell us how you see the basic challenges in these conflict resolution processes underway? What are the main ones? And what do we have to do to overcome these problems? Over to you. Thank you very much. Let me start by welcoming the fact that there are so many young people among us here today. I think that's outstanding. I was expecting that I'd be talking to old academics, crusty old people, but I saw around me young people, young men, young women. I think that's excellent. I think this panel and the forum in general, if it's to continue, has to include in its name youth, peace and security. That's my proposal to start with. Very important. Since we have very little time, I think we've got 4 minutes each. I want to cover 3 items very briefly. I think that the first obstacle or challenge before us when we try to build peace, you know, we've been called champions of peace and knights of peace. It's that for certainly ideological, political, religious or historical reasons, people justify violence. Until we have changed people's hearts and minds, and I know there are leftist intellectuals. I myself, nothing to criticize there, I was part of the left myself. But there are some leftist intellectuals who said that violence was the midwife of history. Until we have overturned that idea, we will not make progress with peace via the means of dialogue, debate, and a quest for consensus. I want to put that idea out to all of you, where I see, as I say once again, more young people. The second thing, briefly, I want to say is that in my own experience in Burundi, in DRC, Sudan, RCA, and now in Libya, the two toughest challenges we're up against are rivalry between outside powers, so let's say non-African countries, trying to influence the course of those African countries in their own interest, to their own benefit, economic benefit, to further their geostrategic interests. So young people, in particular in Africa, but everywhere else in Europe, around the world, have to stand up and support Africa and protect it from external interference. Never happened in the past. It's never been good in the past, and now it will not be good in the future either, for anyone. The third thing, or no, the second challenge, rather, that we're facing with, which is the corollary of outside influence, is what I call satellisation of internal national forces. I saw this when I was the chief mediator in 2019 in Sudan. Now it's happening in Libya, and I saw it in DRC and Burundi. Foreign powers are always trying not to directly interfere, but get satellites. It's what I call satellisation, and this makes it very hard to achieve peace. These negotiations get bogged down. Sorry, I'm feeling a bit under the weather, that's why I'm coughing. But foreign interference, satellisation of domestic forces, these, I see, it's the two main challenges. Third comment, transitional justice in the way you've described it. Either, and I often quote the example from your country, either, and this is a lesson I learned between Hutus and Tutsis in Arusha back in the day. Either you focus your policy of universal justice in terms of bringing perpetrators to justice, and if we cannot prevent them from developing their harmful influence, we will fail. But if you cannot control them, there's the second strategy you should follow, which is about hunting down the perpetrators, arresting them, and getting them judged. That's one thing, but we also need to identify victims and make sure there is reparation, rehabilitation of victims. This choice has been made in 2000. No, I don't speak English very well, but I spoke to Mandela back in the day. I said, how can you choose between the two? And he said, well, it depends on the balance of power. Depends on what you can do. If you can arrest the perpetrators of crimes against humanity, fine, do it. But if you can't, if you're going for consensus and agreement, you have to focus your strategy on the interests of the victims. That's my message to start with, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup, Professeur Lebat.
Thank you very much, Professor Lebat. Now, before I go to the audience, I would like to ask just one thing of our panel.
If you would give each of you one takeaway, un seul point à retenir pour notre public.
Just one takeaway for our audience. So what would you say? So back to you, Professor Lebat. Well, if you're asking me as an African, it would be easy. Let Africa solve its own problems itself through intelligence and the intellectual history, historical intellectual power of Africans.
Merci beaucoup. Hiba, over to you.
Thank you very much, Hiba.
I think my message would be, we cannot afford not to act, really. There's so much urgency. So, in a way, it's time to reunite around common values, and it's time to reunite around common action as well. And I think partnerships is the way for this. We can't do it with polarities. We can't say abdicate your responsibility. We have to do it together. We need collective effort around peace. And we must do it for us and for the next generations.
Thank you. Francisco.
A couple of things. First, please, there is not just war, never. War is always an evil, always. Please work together for a sort of international just peace. And the second point is human rights. Human dignity before. Human dignity because it's the question of the inclusion you were referring to. Because you don't receive human dignity for anybody, neither from the religions, nor for the schools, nor from the states, nor from the political parties, nor from the different ethnic groups or the genders. We just are constituted on human dignity because we are human beings, all of us with the same dignity, all of us together. And also the dignity of nature and the dignity of the future generations. Take that into consideration because in Colombia, we have destroyed that against the indigenous people, the Afro-Colombian people, women, children. Please, please, we belong to only one way of being humans. We together, everywhere, and we have to support this. But not by the way of the war, which is stupid in all its forms. Okay?
Thank you, Francisco. Thank you, Francesco. Widit, je tourne vers vous.
Moi, je pense que chaque être humain,
yes, I think whatever your origin, your color, religion, nationality, every individual is entitled to a safe living context. We are entitled to live with dignity and our rights. So today we need dialogue. We need to listen to each other, to get on, accept differences. We need to accept the other, wherever we come from. And here I agree with Professor Bellan. In our countries, we know the environment, what's good, what's bad. We should never expect others to come in and find a solution. We know our own problems domestically. It just has to be with everyone around the same table, accept the dialogue and agree to change your opinion when the other opinion is better. Thank you.
We have time for one or maybe two questions from the public, and I say questions, not statements. So please, I see here the gentleman with the green jacket. Your question to the panel, please.
Hi, my name is Yusuf Yahya. I'm from Sudan. And my questions to Professor Labat and Ms. Qassas. In an ever-globalized world, I mean, we see the satellites you speak about, the internal versus the external. Are we going to ever see the naming and shaming of these external actors that interfere in domestic problems, right? Because if not, then problems like Sudan will never get solved because of international interest in such countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Professeur Labat, je vous passe la parole.
So I'll give you the floor on that, Professor Ahmed. I'm delighted to have someone from Sudan to talk here.
And I am sure that after this panel, he will ask me to have a photo because I met him everywhere and they are asking me always to have a photo with them. No, you know, it is quite embarrassing for me today to quote those who in your country, Sudan, are interfering and are spoiling the process of reaching a consensus which met the aspirations of the populations. But they are very known, and if there are some agency here or some representative, I am sure that I have gotten my point, that they have to leave Sudanese people to deal with his issues and let him get by his own cultural and historical and so on, his own way for his peace and reconciliation. And you can read my book I wrote on you, Sudan, Chemin de Paix. It will give you some light on the issues.
Merci, Professeur Labat.
Thank you,
Hiba.
Professor Labat.
Okay,
Hiba.
I'm going to actually come from another dimension because I think we need to be able to name and shame also national actors who are, you know, if they're corrupt and they're not necessarily abiding by rules of human rights and they're having such coercive relationships. I think the question of responsibility is important. And while, you know, sometimes, and I can't believe I'm actually having to kind of play this role. I'm usually one of the people who are talking about national, but I think it's important not to go into polarities because we are so polarized right now globally that it's either everything is black or white, everything is, you know, national versus international. I think we need to move beyond that to look at real partnership. There is shared responsibility because we are in an interconnected world, but that responsibility is different. And sometimes you need the international to assist, and you're asking for solidarity. And sometimes there is abdication of responsibility. We think of Afghanistan right now, 20 years, we can say some governments were supporting or engaging in Afghanistan for 20 years, but then, you know, the day after the withdrawal, what is the responsibility to the Afghan people right now when they're going through the current situation? So in that case, we're asking for more international engagement rather than less. So it's just to say it's nuanced. I think it's a question of moving beyond polarities, and we need more international solidarity and respect of national leadership and mutual respect, but there has to be solidarity.
Thank you.
Because we're interdependent.
Thank you so much. Thank you. There is a lady in white behind me. Lady in white, over to you.
Hello, bonjour.
Bonjour, oui. Parlez en français, bien sûr.
Yes, you can speak French if you want to. No. Thank you for talking about Bosnia as a country with lasting peace.
I will speak in English now because it's easier
and
for
I'm going to switch to English.
I have a question for Madame Wided. We mentioned many things that are common to every country that was in a conflict and that's trying to build peace. And I know this is a very complex question, but maybe you can give me 2 or 3 points. What makes, for example, Tunisia different than other Arab countries? Because it's often mentioned as one very positive example of Arab Springs. We know what happened in Syria. We know what happened in Egypt and other countries. So is it society, culture? Is it specific way of organization? Maybe just to give a couple of points, although I know it can be a whole life research. What distinguishes one country from another and what makes peace possible? Thank you.
Super. Thank you so much. Merci pour votre question. Wided.
Thank you very much. Yes, so we did.
I think for each country, we have different and specific, arguments, and we do need to work by ourselves to find solution. For me, it's very important for us as we have the education in Tunisia, women empowerment, and I think the involvement of the civil society in every point, in every step. We need to have the 3 main pillars in each society. So we can deal with our issue, we can find solution to all our problems. That's why, for me, I like and why I'm so happy to have this. These young people here around us, and they are listening to our experiences. Because with you, we can make changement. With you, we can do something different, and with you, we can use social medias, we can use communication, ITs to ask and to be informed and to give solution and to learn from other experiences. What made Tunisia different? I said education, and I insist on this. We need to start from, the beginning, how we can educate people to accept each other. We need also to be more open to accept differences and also to count on your services. It's very important. For us, when we had this national dialogue in Tunisia, we refused, as Quartet, any international intervention. We said for them, we'll do it by ourselves. It was a Tunisian 100% product made by Tunisian. Because we know our environment, we know the solution, and we were able to find the solution. That's why you have to deal with your issue, and I'm sure you're going to find the solution for your country.
Thank you, Wided. Father Francisco, last words.
Well, I will invite especially young people here who are the future, to see for the truth always, the truth of the reality, what is going to happen with the victims everywhere, to nature, everywhere, truth. I'm being very honest with truth. Enter into dialogue, but always in truth. It doesn't matter if you create problems with political parties, with religions, with other kind of people. Truth is absolutely important, and to be very honest in searching for the truth.
No.
And also thinking that going through war is never the solution. This is not truth at all. So I invite you, because you young people, you are honest, you are transparent, you are always thinking about integrity and consistency, to have those in your mind, to be truthful people and to create trust among us because of that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Francisco. Well, I think that the time to conclude this panel has come. We all know peace is very precious and is very fragile, but I think from what we heard here in this panel, we can break the vicious circle of war and violence. And this requires a number of things. First of all, we all need to remember always that war is evil. There is no such thing as a good war, as a just war. War is evil. We should think about the victims. The victims. If you think about the victims, you can never think that war is a good thing. It's impossible. That's the first point. The second point, we need dialogue. We are human beings. What distinguishes us from animals is that we can speak to each other. We can have a rational dialogue. We need dialogue. We need to listen to each other. We need to look for the truth. We need to make sure that everybody is involved in that dialogue. We heard about young people, about women, but of course, everybody in society. That's the second point. The third point builds on that: inclusivity in every possible way. Inclusivity in the sense that we need tangible outcomes that really deal with the issues that are of importance to the real people that are involved and that go to the fundamental causes of the problem. Then we need, and this we should never forget, we need to think in terms of human dignity, truth, justice, and we need to go for transitional justice so that the dignity, the value of the victims, but also the perpetrators can be restored. Education is very important. That is the fourth point. The fifth point, the international setting. The international community has a role, but a role in staying out when it should stay out, and serving the role of midwives, of partners, when this can be useful. No interference, no interference, exactly. That's very, very clear, no interference. And the last point, we need a holistic approach, holistic in terms of the people, the nature, the generations, our generation today, the future generations. That's the only way to keep peace, preserve peace, sustain peace. So, with this, let me thank our wonderful panel members. Let me thank all of you here in the room and online. And so let's bear in mind, we can avoid war. War is never good. We can build sustainable peace, but we need to work for it every day. All of us, anywhere, anytime. Then we can make it happen. Thank you so much. Thank you.